The room was thick with silence, broken only by the sound of a faint creak, followed by a loud bang. "What was that?" Jane whispered, eyes darting around the darkened room. The house felt wrong, too still, too empty, like something was waiting just behind the walls. The faint chill creeping up her spine made her hesitate. She had been hearing noises for days now. At first, she told herself it was just the house settling. But now, there was a nagging certainty that something was wrong. Her hand trembled as she reached for the phone. It was then, as the eerie silence returned, that she heard it again. A low whisper, barely audible, coming from the walls. Her blood ran cold. There was no one else in the house. She wasn't alone. She wasn't safe. The silence in the room felt suffocating as Jane's breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded, louder than the whisper she had heard just moments ago. She reached out shakily, pressing the phone against her ear. "Hello?" Her voice trembled. There was no answer. Only the sound of her own breath echoed back at her. Then, another creak, this time from the floorboard near the hallway. She froze, listening intently. Her body was rigid with tension. "This isn't happening," she muttered under her breath, trying to convince herself. The house was old. It creaked, groaned, and settled. But the whisper, the cold draft, the shadows in the hallway, they were something else. She set the phone down, her mind racing. She needed to leave, to escape, but every fiber of her being screamed that she couldn't. Whatever was here, it was watching. And it wasn't going to let her go. The temperature in the room dropped abruptly. Jane felt the chill crawl up her spine, sending a shiver across her body. The whisper had turned into a hiss, growing clearer with each passing second. "Why are you here?" she whispered, barely audible, as if speaking aloud might provoke the thing in the walls. Her gaze snapped to the hallway again, her body still frozen in place. It was then that she noticed the faint outline of something in the corner. Her breath caught in her throat, and her fingers tightened on the phone, even though it offered no comfort. She had to leave, but every instinct told her not to move. "Just leave me alone," she pleaded softly, her voice cracking as the darkness in the hallway seemed to grow darker, thicker. A sudden gust of wind slammed the door to the outside, shut with a deafening bang, and the room went deathly still. Jane stood, her legs trembling beneath her, every muscle in her body screaming at her to run, to get out of this place. But there was no way out, not anymore. The air seemed to thicken with every passing moment, the walls pressing in on her. She glanced at the front door, her heart racing at the thought of fleeing into the unknown, but she couldn't make herself move. "Why is this happening?" she whispered to herself. The voice, the whispers, the cold, it was all too real now. She had lived in this house for years, and nothing like this had ever happened before. She took a step forward, her feet dragging, unwilling to go toward the terrifying hallway. The shadows continued to grow, taking on more form, more substance. The air was alive with the unnatural chill, and for the first time, she realized that the house wasn't just haunted by the past, it was alive with something far worse. A sudden, gut-wrenching screech echoed from the walls, followed by a loud bang from above. Jane stumbled backward, nearly falling, her heart pounding in her chest. "No, no, no," she whispered, barely able to breathe. The room felt like it was closing in on her, the shadows pressing in on all sides. She couldn't think. She could barely move. Something was in the house with her, something far worse than she could ever have imagined. The whisper had become a full-blown voice, faint but unmistakably real. Her mind raced to make sense of it, but there was no sense to be made. "I have to get out of here," she muttered. But as she turned toward the door, a sharp cold gust of air slammed against her, and she heard it again. A voice, this time clearly saying her name. "Jane." It came from the walls. It was not a question. It was a command. The silence had returned, but it wasn't the same. It was heavier now, thick with anticipation. Jane, aged 37, couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, even in the light of day. She walked through the house, her eyes constantly darting toward dark corners, half expecting something to emerge. Every creak of the floorboards beneath her feet felt amplified, each one echoing in the empty space. As she passed the hallway again, the temperature seemed to drop and the air thickened. "I can't stay here," she whispered to herself, but there was no place to go, not anymore. A sudden gust of wind slammed the windows shut, and she jumped, her heart pounding. The air grew cold once more. Jane paused at the door, her fingers trembling on the handle. But before she could open it, a low growl echoed from deep within the walls, vibrating the very foundation of the house. She recoiled, breath caught in her throat. She wasn't alone. The door was locked. Jane turned the handle repeatedly, her anxiety rising with every turn. "Come on," she muttered, her breath coming in quick bursts. She had checked the door multiple times, but it was always locked. The growl she'd heard earlier still echoed in her ears, reverberating deep within her chest. She took a deep breath and glanced back toward the hallway. It felt as if the house itself was holding her captive. The shadows in the hallway had grown darker, deeper, as if they were reaching for her. The walls seemed to pulse with the sinister rhythm of her own heartbeat. With her nerves on edge, she fumbled for her phone, dialing a number she hadn't dared call in days. The line clicked. A voice on the other end answered, but it wasn't the voice she expected. It was a whisper, faint but unmistakable, coming from the walls. "Help me," it hissed. "Help me, Jane." The whispering had grown louder, now unmistakable. Jane, aged 37, hurriedly shoved her phone into her pocket and stood still in the middle of the room. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of what was happening. "This can't be real," she murmured. But it was. She had seen the shadows move, felt the cold breath on the back of her neck. Every corner of the house seemed to be alive with malevolent energy, pressing in on her. She wanted to run, to escape this nightmare, but she couldn't. Something was holding her here, and the longer she stayed, the more she felt it in her bones. The house was feeding off her fear. A sudden gust of wind blew through the cracked window, and a chill swept through the room. Jane shuddered, her heart racing. She turned her gaze toward the hallway again, the shadows now almost thick enough to touch. Something, or someone, was waiting. Jane couldn't ignore it anymore. She knew what she had to do, though every part of her screamed not to. She had to confront whatever was haunting her, even if it meant facing her worst fears. With slow, deliberate steps, she walked toward the darkened hallway. The temperature dropped again, and Jane could feel the icy chill seep into her bones. The shadows around her seemed to coil and shift as if they had a mind of their own. Her breath came in short bursts, and she swiped at her hair nervously. Every fiber of her being urged her to turn around, to run away, but she couldn't. She was drawn forward by some unseen force. The further she walked into the hallway, the louder the whisper became. It felt as if the walls themselves were closing in. "Help me." The voice was clearer now, almost desperate. Jane froze. She wasn't alone, but she couldn't see anything. There was nothing to face, yet everything was there. The voice came again, sharper this time. "Jane, help me." It was unmistakably coming from the walls, each word piercing her thoughts. She stepped forward, drawn to the source of the voice, and as she did, she felt a sudden pull, a force like nothing she had ever felt before. It was as if the house itself was reaching out to her, urging her to move closer. Her legs felt heavy, reluctant, but the pull was irresistible. She could feel the air grow colder, the shadows growing darker and thicker around her. The whisper wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a presence wrapping itself around her. She reached out, her hand trembling as she touched the wall. Immediately, she felt a surge of energy, as if something inside the house had awakened. The temperature dropped even further, and the whispers turned into growls. Whatever was behind the walls was waking up, and Jane was its first target. The whispers had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to stretch on for hours. Jane, aged 37, stood motionless in the hallway, trying to process the words she had heard. "Help me, Jane. The voice wasn't unfamiliar. It was a memory, a long-buried memory. A name flickered in her mind, just out of reach. It was the same voice from her childhood, the one she had thought she had forgotten. No, it can't be, she whispered to herself, her voice trembling. Her mind raced to connect the dots, but the images were fragmented, obscured by years of trauma. She backed away slowly, almost as if she could outrun the truth. But the truth was catching up to her. The house seemed to grow colder with each step she took. The walls pulsed, thrumming with a sinister energy, and Jane realized with a chilling certainty that her past was now inextricably tied to the evil in the house. And the truth, whatever it was far worse than she had imagined. It was then that Jane remembered. The voice, the name, it was her sister's. Mia.e. Her younger sister, the one she had lost when they were just children. Jane's heart skipped a beat. Mia had vanished without a trace, and for years, Jane had convinced herself that it was just a tragedy, a story that no one could explain. But now, standing in the house surrounded by the ominous whispers, the truth was beginning to piece itself together. Her sister's disappearance had never been a random event. It had been a consequence of something darker, something far more sinister. Jane shook her head, unable to comprehend what was happening. How could Mia's voice be here? How could she still be alive? The air around her seemed to thicken, pressing in on her chest, and the walls seemed to close in, as if the house itself was listening, waiting for her to accept the truth. No, she whispered, fighting the rising tide of panic. No, this can't be real. Help me, Jane. The voice was louder now, unmistakable. It came from the walls, vibrating the very air around her. She staggered back, a wave of nausea crashing over her. Mia, the name echoed again, this time accompanied by an image, a flash of her sister's face, laughing, carefree, just before she disappeared. Jane could still remember that day so vividly. They had been playing in the garden when Mia had suddenly run off, calling for Jane to follow her. But Jane had hesitated, looking back at their mother who was calling them inside. When she had turned around, Mia was gone, as if swallowed by the earth itself. Jane's mind spiraled as she tried to understand what was happening. Was Mia still alive? How had she become trapped in the walls of this house? Desperation clawed at her chest as the whispers turned into frantic cries. She had to find out what happened to Mia. But the house was fighting her, trapping her in its dark grip. The walls began to shift. Jane, unable to look away, watched as cracks appeared in the plaster, and a dark shadowy figure began to emerge. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and Jane stumbled backward, her breath quickening. Mia, she screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the growing sound of scratching and scraping from within the walls. The figure in the wall took shape, a face appearing through the cracks, eyes wide and staring, but not Mia's face. Jane's blood ran cold. The figure was a reflection of something darker, twisted, and far more sinister than she could comprehend. The house had not just taken her sister, it had taken her family, her memories, and now it was ready to take her too. The figure reached out toward her, and Jane felt a cold, invisible hand grip her chest, tightening, choking her as the truth sank in. Mia had never left. She had been here, trapped in this house, all along. Jane's heart raced as she gasped for air, the weight on her chest unbearable. The figure continued to loom closer, its eyes locked onto her with an unblinking stare. Mia? She whispered, almost begging. Is it really you? The figure didn't respond, but the air grew colder, and Jane's surroundings began to distort further. She reached out, her fingers brushing the wall where the figure had emerged. The moment her skin made contact, the figure's face twisted into a grotesque grin, and Jane screamed as the wall seemed to open up, pulling her into its depths. Panic flooded her as she tried to pull back, but it was too late. The house had claimed her. She was sinking into the wall, into the darkness where Mia had been trapped all those years ago. And now she would join her sister, lost forever to the house's insatiable hunger. Jane stood motionless in the center of the room, her breathing shallow and erratic. She had to find a way to break free, to escape the grip of the house, but everything she had tried so far had failed. The walls seemed to press in, suffocating her, whispering her name from every corner. "Why won't you leave me alone?" she whispered, more to herself than to any unseen force. The house, the memories, the shadows, they were all tangled together, impossible to escape. She wanted to run, to scream, but something held her in place, an invisible force that was more than just fear. She could feel the house closing in, its dark presence creeping into every part of her mind. The whispers had stopped, but they were replaced by something worse, an oppressive silence, a waiting presence that knew she was broken, and it was waiting for her to crack. "I can't take it anymore," she muttered, as the darkness around her deepened. Suddenly, a sharp sound echoed from the walls, something like a whisper, but louder, more commanding. Jane flinched, her body reacting before her mind could catch up. She spun around, eyes wide with panic, but there was no one there. "What do you want from me?" she shouted, her voice trembling. There was no answer. The silence stretched out, suffocating. Then, another sound. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoed from the hallway. Jane froze. It couldn't be real, could it? She had to confront it, face whatever this force was head on. If she didn't, it would consume her, piece by piece. "I'm not afraid of you," she muttered, though her voice cracked with doubt. Her hand slowly reached for the door handle. She knew that if she left now, she might never come back. But if she stayed, she would be trapped forever, consumed by the darkness that seemed to follow her every move. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Jane's breath caught in her throat, her heart hammering in her chest. Every instinct told her to run, to escape, but her feet refused to move. The hallway stretched endlessly in front of her, the shadows growing darker with each step the footsteps took. She turned slowly, heart pounding. But there was nothing there. Her mind raced, but she couldn't make sense of it. "Am I losing my mind?" she wondered, the thought gnawing at her. She reached out to touch the walls, half expecting to feel something move beneath her fingers. But the walls were still, cold and unyielding. Her mind screamed for an explanation, but the silence that answered was deafening. Then, as if to mock her, the whispers returned, this time clearer, more distinct. Come closer," they beckoned. Jane's blood ran cold as she realized that the house was no longer just watching, it was waiting for her to give in. As Jane's fingers made contact with the wall, the house seemed to shudder. The temperature dropped sharply, and she pulled her hand away, gasping for air. The air felt heavier, more oppressive, like it was suffocating her. The whispers intensified, now forming a chant, a rhythm that pounded in her skull. "You can't escape," they chanted. "You belong here." Jane stumbled back, eyes wide with fear. She couldn't escape, not anymore. She was trapped, bound to the house, just like Mia had been. The truth crashed over her like a wave. Mia hadn't disappeared. She had been absorbed into the house, a part of it, a victim of the same dark force that now sought to consume her. Jane fell to her knees, trembling. The realization that she was bound to this house, forever caught in its grasp, was too much to bear. The walls closed in, as the whispers turned into a scream, and Jane realized that the house was alive, and it was hungry. The final scream shattered the silence, a piercing wail that seemed to echo through every corner of the house. Jane looked up, her heart pounding as the walls around her began to move. Something was emerging from the very fabric of the house, something monstrous, something that had been waiting for her. She could see the shape forming, a grotesque figure, its body twisting and contorting, as if made of the very walls themselves. "Mia!" Jane screamed, her voice breaking. The figure paused, and for a fleeting moment, Jane thought she saw her sister's face. But it was twisted, distorted, and there was no recognition in the eyes that stared back at her. She backed away, fear overwhelming her. The house had taken Mia, and now it was taking her too. Jane had one chance, one moment to escape, but the house wasn't letting her go. It had claimed her, and it was hungry. The room was deathly silent, save for the faint scratching sounds that reverberated through the walls. Jane, aged 37, stood at the center, her heart racing, sweat dripping down her face. The figure, now fully emerged from the walls, loomed before her, its twisted form writhing and shifting with a life of its own. "You think you can fight me?" The voice hissed, but it wasn't the voice of a person. It was something ancient, malevolent. Jane's body trembled, her mind struggling to comprehend what was happening. She had to act, to do something. Every fiber of her being screamed to run, but there was no escape, not anymore. "I won't let you take me," she said, her voice shaking but defiant. The house had tried to consume her, to break her, but she wouldn't let it. Not without a fight. The figure's hollow eyes gleamed, and its mouth stretched into a grotesque smile, as if savoring the fear that radiated from her. The figure's laughter echoed through the room, a low, guttural sound that vibrated the air. "You can't escape. You never could," it taunted, its voice twisting with mockery. Jane could feel her pulse pounding in her ears, but she stood her ground. She wasn't just fighting for her life anymore. She was fighting for her sister, for everything the house had taken from her. The figure lunged toward her, its limbs stretching unnaturally, impossibly long. Jane's eyes widened, but she didn't flinch. She had no choice but to fight. She grabbed a nearby lamp, swinging it with all her might, aiming for the figure's writhing form. The lamp crashed into it, but instead of breaking, the light flickered and then went out completely. The room plunged into darkness. Jane gasped, realizing the house had trapped her in its grasp once more. Her breath came faster, and she felt a chill creep up her spine. "I won't let you win," she whispered, though the words seemed weak in the darkness. Suddenly the room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in around her. Jane's breath was shallow, her hands trembling. The figure loomed closer, its presence overwhelming. The whispers were back, louder now, pressing into her mind like a vice. She could hear Mia's voice once more, distant but clear, calling her name. "Mia," Jane whispered, the name escaping her lips before she could stop it. The figure paused, its shape rippling. For a moment, Jane thought she saw her sister's face, twisted and distorted, gazing back at her. But it wasn't Mia. It was something worse, something that had taken Mia's place. Jane's mind raced, but the terror was overpowering. The house had consumed her sister, and now it wanted her too. She felt the cold touch of the figure's hand on her arm, sending a shock of ice through her body. "You can't fight me, Jane," the figure crooned. "You were always meant to be mine." Jane's heart pounded in her chest as the figure's hand touched her skin. It was cold, impossibly cold. The air grew even more frigid as the wall seemed to press in closer, narrowing the space around her. She could feel the figure pulling her in, draining the life from her, but she refused to give in. "No!" she cried, her voice ragged. With every ounce of strength she had left, she pushed against the figure, breaking free from its grip. For a brief moment, she saw an opening, a way out. The door. It was just a few feet away. But the figure wasn't finished with her yet. Its screeching voice filled the room as it lunged at her, its body twisting and contorting in impossible ways. Jane's mind screamed for her to move, but her body refused to cooperate. She had to escape, but the house was fighting back, pulling her in with an inescapable force. With one last surge of energy, Jane managed to break free from the figure's grasp. She stumbled toward the door, her legs weak, her body trembling with exhaustion. "I'm not your prisoner," she screamed, her voice hoarse. She felt the door beneath her hand, cold and solid. But as she opened it, a powerful force slammed into her, knocking her backward. The door slammed shut behind her, and the house seemed to sigh, as if disappointed. Jane collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. She had escaped, but she knew she couldn't leave. The house had marked her. It would never let her go. The walls closed in again, and she realized, with a horrible clarity, that this wasn't just about surviving anymore. This was about breaking free from the very thing that had consumed her family, her mind, and now her soul. The darkness was coming, and this time, it wasn't just the house, It was her. The dust had settled, but Jane's body was still trembling, her breath shallow as she lay collapsed on the cold floor. She had survived, but the victory felt hollow. The house had been defeated, but it had taken so much from her. Her mind raced, the weight of the past, and the terror she had experienced pressing in on her. "Is it over?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. She had come so close to losing everything, her mind, her soul. The walls around her were silent now, the oppressive atmosphere gone, but the emptiness remained. She closed her eyes, hoping for peace, but she knew better. There was no peace here, not anymore. The house might be gone, but its mark on her was permanent. She would carry its weight forever. The question wasn't whether she had survived, it was whether she could ever be whole again. As Jane slowly rose to her feet, the weight of everything she had been through pressed down on her shoulders. The house was quiet now, but the lingering feeling of dread would never leave her. She glanced around as if expecting something to jump out from the shadows, but the room remained still. "It's over," she murmured, though she didn't believe it. The darkness inside her hadn't gone away. The house might have been silent, but the memories were alive, burning in her mind. Every corner, every crack in the walls reminded her of what she had survived and what she had lost. She turned and walked toward the door, each step heavy with the knowledge that she was leaving. But part of her would always be trapped here, in the haunted silence of the house. The evil might be gone, but its impact would stay with her forever. Jane stepped into the hallway, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. She could still feel the weight of the house's presence, lingering just beneath the surface. The memories of her sister, the horrors they had both suffered, the twisted figure that had haunted her, it was all still fresh in her mind. The house had tried to break her, but she had fought back. She had survived. But at what cost? "I should have saved her," Jane whispered, her voice breaking. "I should have done more." The guilt clawed at her, the thought of her sister still trapped in the house, lost forever. Jane closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. She would never be able to undo what had happened, but she could learn to live with it. She had to. The house had won a battle, but Jane was still standing. That was all she could hold on to now. The door was in front of her now, the exit, the final escape from the nightmare. But as Jane reached for the door handle, she hesitated. The air around her felt thick, suffocating. She turned back one last time, gazing into the dark corners of the house. She had been through so much to get here, but the house had already taken its toll. She could never truly leave it behind. The memories, the fear, the echoes of Maya's voice, they would haunt her, follow her wherever she went. "Goodbye," Jane whispered, her voice filled with both sorrow and relief. "Goodbye to you all." She opened the door and stepped into the light, but as the door closed behind her, a faint whisper, almost inaudible, escaped the house, as though it was still calling her name. Jane's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't turn back. She couldn't. The world outside was quiet, bathed in the soft light of the early morning. Jane stood on the threshold of the house, her feet planted firmly on the ground. She had escaped, but the emptiness inside her remained. Her body was bruised, her mind exhausted, but she had made it. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the fresh air, as if to cleanse herself of the darkness she had endured. The house was behind her now, silent and still, but Jane knew that it would always be a part of her. The door had closed, but the memories would never fade. As Jane walked away, the faintest echo of a whisper reached her ears, a reminder that some horrors never truly leave. But she was free. For now. Jane stepped through the threshold of her new home, the door creaking behind her as it closed softly. The world outside seemed peaceful, bathed in the warm light of the early morning sun. Yet something felt wrong, off kilter. The further she walked, the more the hairs on her neck stood on end. Had she truly escaped? She hadn't looked back. She couldn't. The house she had left behind was silent now, but in her chest, the weight of the memories remained. Every corner of her mind felt haunted by what she had lived through. She had fought the darkness, survived it, But as she took each step forward, she couldn't help but feel that the darkness hadn't truly left her. It was there in the quiet whispers in her ears, in the sensation of eyes watching her from the shadows, lingering. She pushed the thought away, determined to move on, but deep down, she knew the terror wasn't over. It was just waiting, biding its time. The days passed in a blur. Jane tried to convince herself that the house was behind her, that she had outrun the nightmare. She took long walks through the quiet neighborhood, trying to escape the suffocating presence of the past. But the dreams, oh, the dreams, were where it all started again. Each night, she would wake in a cold sweat, heart pounding, as she saw the same figures in the dark. They were always there, Mia. The figure from the walls, the shadows closing in. They were whispers now, more distant, but still present. She hadn't heard them out loud in days, but their echoes reverberated in her mind, haunting her waking moments. I can't escape them, Jane realized. The darkness was no longer confined to the house. It was inside her now, and it would never let her go. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned a deep shade of purple, Jane sat in her new living room, staring at the quiet, empty walls. The peace she had so desperately sought seemed hollow, the silence oppressive. Suddenly, the temperature dropped. She shivered, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders, but the chill remained. It wasn't the cold of the outside, it was the cold that comes from within, the cold that runs deep in your veins. Jane's heart skipped a beat. The shadows in the corners of the room began to stretch, creeping toward her like they had in the house. A whisper, faint but unmistakable, brushed against her ears. Jane. She froze, eyes wide with terror. It wasn't a memory. It was real, and it was here. She tried to shake it off, but the room felt heavier, the air more suffocating. There was no escaping it. The darkness had followed her. Panic rose in Jane's chest as the whispers grew louder, clearer. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. She had fought so hard to break free, to leave it all behind, but now it was here again. The figure in the shadows loomed, a dark, formless shape that seemed to grow with every passing second. No! Jane screamed, her voice breaking as she stood up, backing away from the corners of the room. The walls pulsed, the house breathing, the same malevolent force closing in on her. She wanted to run, but her legs felt like lead. The figure in the shadows stretched out, its long twisted limbs reaching toward her. You can never leave, it hissed. Jane stumbled backward, her eyes wide with fear, but there was nowhere to go. She was trapped, again. The darkness had found her once more. As the figure's hand reached for her, Jane's mind fractured. She couldn't fight it. The fear, the helplessness, it was all consuming. Was this how it ended? But then, something within her snapped. The darkness had already claimed so much, her sister, her sanity, her life, but it wouldn't take her now. No, she whispered again, louder this time, her voice trembling but strong. I won't let you win. With every ounce of strength left, Jane forced herself to move, breaking free from the suffocating grip of the darkness. The room seemed to shift, the shadows pulling back, and for the first time, Jane felt the weight of the house lifting. But even as the whispers died down, she knew one thing: this wasn't over. The house was still there, waiting, and so was the darkness within her. Jane had survived, but she was far from free.